Hey, what's up everyone, Danny here. This is the MSI Bravo 15. MSI created this to be a powerful yet affordable gaming laptop, and they sent it over for me to review. I was super excited to check it out because this is an all AMD laptop that has a Ryzen 7 8-core 16-thread processor in it. That's a lot of power to fit in a small space. And for the longest time, we saw performance laptops being dominated by both Intel and Nvidia. So I think it's awesome that AMD has been more prevalent in higher tier laptops and are driving more competition into the market. So let's take a look and see what this is all about. But before that, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Antline Audio, creators of the Mod Mic, the boom microphones that can be attached to almost anything you want. Take your favorite pair of headphones, VR headset, or whatever else you fancy, find a flat surface to attach the magnetic base to, and instantly turn it into a sound recording peripheral. The Mod Mic comes in 3 different versions, the wireless, USB, and universal 3.5mm. All the audio in this pre-roll is actually being recorded by the Mod Mic wireless, and this is all the way over in my echoey bathroom. This is raw and unedited. It hasn't been altered in any way, so this is the high quality sound that you can expect from Mod Mic. If you're interested in this or any of the other products that they have to offer, definitely check out the links in the description below. But other than that, back to the video. So let's go over all the core specs. This is a 15-inch laptop that is equipped with a Ryzen 7 4800H, a RX 5500M with 4GB of GDDR6 video memory, 16GB of system memory at 3200MHz, and a 500GB M.2 NVMe SSD. This particular configuration comes in at $1,000 but there are other models that are available that cost less, like the ones that have either Ryzen 5 4600H in them, or ones with less RAM, like 8GB of system memory. When I first heard the specs of this laptop, I was a bit confused because even though I was super excited about the 4800H, it's pretty hard not to notice the big gap between the CPU and GPU. Now, the RX 5500M is not necessarily an entry-level GPU because that's what the RX 5300M would be, but it's still not quite mid-range in my opinion. I think it falls a little short of it. I'd classify the 5600M more as mid-range. So MSI specifically calling this a gaming laptop and using that as the descriptor is a little bit strange. I mean, they're not wrong, it's definitely capable of gaming, but gaming isn't where this is gonna shine. The real spotlight is going to be taken by the 4800H in CPU-intensive workloads like for video editing, encoding, compiling programs or code, streaming, you name it. Gaming, on the other hand, will be a little bit held back by the 5500M, and you're going to see that later on when we look at the gaming benchmarks. The build quality of the Bravo 15 is for the most part good. The only thing that felt subpar is this touchpad. The left and right buttons are actually built into the bottom corners of the touchpad, and the way it's built, it has a lot of give. It can travel quite a bit without you actually clicking. Like, I'm not sure if you can see on the screen here, but that's just how much give it has in it. It doesn't feel sturdy under your finger, and it's just a little bit awkward. But for basic tasks, you know, I got used to it and I got by. And then for gaming, I always use like an external mouse or something like that. I just don't understand what their goal was with this touchpad design, whether this was intentional or not, but I am not a fan of it. Touchpad aside though, the rest of the build is good. The hinges are solid, the display doesn't flex a bunch, the top lid is actually brushed aluminum, and the upper keyboard deck is also brushed aluminum. The bezel around the display is plastic, and the bottom cover is also plastic. So it's like a half plastic, half metal laptop, which actually does a really good job at giving it a high quality look and feel compared to like all plastic laptops. If this is their approach to lowering the cost while making the chassis still feel more premium and expensive, then I'm all for it. You know, I don't really care that the bottom or the bezels is plastic. The keyboard deck and the lid is what you see and touch the most. So those being brushed aluminum really does go a long way in my opinion. The keyboard is chiclet style with flat, low-profile keys that have a somewhat gamery font to them, and it glows bright red. I've got no problems with this keyboard. I've spent quite a bit of time gaming on it and didn't have any issues, and for typing, it was fine. I'm able to type almost as fast on this as I am on my personal mechanical keyboard on my desktop, with little to no errors, which is about as much as I can expect from a laptop keyboard. On the left side of the laptop, you have the charging port and HDMI out, and that's it. On the right side, there's the audio jack, 2 USB Type-A ports, 2 USB Type-C ports, which is really nice to see, the Ethernet port, and the slot for the security lock. Taking a look under the hood, we have the internals, and here you see the cooler design, which has a total of 6 heat pipes across the CPU and GPU. There are 2 sodium slots for RAM. This model is populated with 2 8GB sticks of 3200MHz running in dual channel, and the laptop can support a total of 64GB. There are 2 small down-facing 2-watt speakers. These can get pretty loud, but as with most laptop speakers, they're pretty mediocre. With regards to storage, this laptop comes populated with one M.2 NVMe drive, and there is room for another one for expandability. For wireless connectivity, we've got the Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX200 adapter, which also supports Bluetooth 5.0. The battery in this is 51 watt hours, which is kind of on the lower end, but with that said, I was still able to get a lot out of a full charge on this. Using MSI's Dragon Center to set it to super battery mode, with the monitor on at half brightness, I was able to get over 7 hours of use out of it for basic tasks like word processing and spreadsheets. When I used it for multimedia, I was able to get just over 3 hours of watching YouTube videos with music playing through the speakers. In terms of gaming, you're not going to want to use this without being plugged in because you only get around 45 minutes of game time, and the performance is going to take a big hit because as soon as you unplug it, even if you set it to like the max performance mode, the laptop does dial back because it is on the battery. The display on the Bravo 15 isn't the best. MSI categorizes it as IPS level, but unfortunately I don't own a monitor calibration tool so I could test the color accuracy with. But even within the published specs, it hints at the color accuracy, which this is 45% NTSC, which equates to around 50 to 60% sRGB accuracy. You'd need 72% NTSC to hit 99% sRGB accuracy. So what that means is that with all the power that this laptop has packed under the hood, you know, that Ryzen 7 4800H, if you're using it for content creation like video editing or for photo editing or any other task that requires a high degree of color accuracy, you're going to need an external monitor with better colors on the side to supplement it. The refresh rate of this panel is 120 Hz and it features FreeSync Premium, which is essentially a FreeSync badge that requires a 120 Hz or higher monitor, and it offers low frame rate compensation to keep your gaming experience smooth. If you're coming from a 60 Hz monitor, this is nice as a step up, but I should go back to what I mentioned earlier in the video. This laptop doesn't have the most powerful GPU, so you're going to really need to think about what titles you're interested in playing and what settings you're going to be playing them at to be able to take advantage of the display and that high refresh rate. Before we get into the performance, I have to talk about the biggest shortcomings of this laptop, and that is the thermals and fan noise. You'll see this in the upcoming benchmarks, but pretty much anytime the laptop is under any load, whether it's rendering out a video or it's, you know, playing a game, it runs really hot, and in turn it runs really loud because of that. Part of the problem is that while the MSI Dragon Center is really handy in terms of monitoring and controlling a lot of things on this laptop, the fan controls basically don't do anything. The extreme performance mode essentially lets the laptop run loose, so it'll push as hard as possible and run the fans near max speed to adjust the thermals. But the thing is that it's really loud though. So say you want a profile that is dialed down a bit, you know, just so that you have more reasonable fan noise. There's an option to set custom fan curves, but when I set everything to low, it basically didn't do anything. The laptop was still ramping up at like max levels, even though I set them to like 25% or something like that. It would be one thing if this laptop was getting hot and loud when I was running synthetic benchmarks and stress tests, because those typically push your laptop further than, you know, typical everyday use cases. But that's not the case. It's actually just getting loud on almost every single title I throw at it, whether it be something lighter like an esports title or a AAA title. Let me give you a sample of the, you know, different levels of fan noise. The source of the problem seems pretty clear. Here's the visual from MSI themselves of how the cooler is supposed to operate. You see from this diagram that the fresh air is coming in normal to the fans, but in reality, those fans don't even have any vents over them. All the vents on the bottom cover are actually placed over the copper heat pipes instead of the fans. I'm not sure why it was designed like this, but I did a small experiment where I removed the bottom cover and I gamed with it off. And doing that, I saw anywhere between a 5 to 10 degree lower temperatures. I'm not saying that placing vents over the fans is going to give you the same result, because that's definitely not the same as completely removing the cover. But I think it's safe to say that if they did place vents there, it would help. Okay, now onto the benchmarks. Everything was run with the extreme performance mode, which again is the highest mode that the laptop has to offer. First up is Cinebench R20, which scored just shy of 4000 CB in multi-core and 468 in single-core. For reference, this is roughly the performance you'd get out of a stock Ryzen 7 2700X desktop CPU, which despite being a couple generations back is no slouch, and it's definitely impressive to see in a laptop. I also ran Cinebench R15 in case you prefer that or wanted, to use those numbers to make comparisons to your own hardware, and the 4800H scored 1775 CB in multi-core and 186 CB in single-core. In Unigine superposition, the RX 5500M scored around 8300 in the preset 1080p medium run, and just over 6000 when the settings were set to high. In 3D Mark Firestrike, this scored in the mid 11,000s, and do note that this is a combined score, which can be a little bit tricky and maybe a little bit skewed, since we do have a big difference between the CPU and the GPU, so definitely take a look at the individual graphics and physics scores if you want to make direct comparisons to like individual CPUs or GPUs, and that 21,000 that you're seeing does line up with what you would expect out of a stock desktop 2700X. In 3D Mark Time Spy, we scored 4,677. So those were the synthetics. Now let's take a look at some actual gaming performance. You can see the average FPS 1% and 0.1% lows that are constantly updating real time during the testing. We'll start off with the esports titles first, where this laptop pretty much has zero issues. In League of Legends at max settings, I was seeing an average of around 130 FPS, which fully utilizes this panel's refresh rate. 1% and 0.1% lows were above 60 FPS, so no problems with any frame drops or anything like that. In Valorant at max settings, I was getting anywhere from 150 to 160 FPS average, and again, 1% and 0.1% lows were well above 60 FPS. It definitely benefits from the higher FPS and refresh rates, and the RX 5500M handles it plenty fine. In CSGO, I tested at the default settings that the game decides based on the detected hardware. The average frame rate was just shy of the 120 FPS mark, but it did have good 1% and 0.1% lows. Also, be sure to check out those extra toasty CPU temps right there in the top corner. As mentioned earlier, when the temps get this hot, the fan is basically running near full speed and is blasting the entire time. It's pretty loud. Moving into some Battle Royale titles, in Apex Legends, I had to play at the lowest settings to push up the frame rate as high as possible, but even then, I was just hitting over 100 FPS average. I was aiming for that 120 FPS sweet spot, but I couldn't get there without lowering the resolution. 1% lows though were good in the mid 50s, and the 0.1% lows were in the high 30s. Both of these were acceptable, and they didn't present any distracting frame drops or anything during gameplay. Apex also ran really hot, with the CPU basically running at over 90 degrees for the entire duration of the game. You can really see that the temps are an issue in some of these games and causes the CPU to throttle. Let's take a look at Valorant and Apex Legends side by side. In Valorant, the 4800H is operating in the low to mid 80 degrees, and the cores are all running basically at a constant 4.1 GHz. Now look at Apex, which is operating above 90 degrees, and every time the temperature spikes to the mid 90s, you see the frequency throttle back under 4 GHz. This issue was not specific to Apex. This actually happened on a few of the other titles as well. In Fortnite, I played at competitive low settings except for the maxed out view distance. I was averaging around 140 FPS. 1% lows were good, but the 0.1% lows were around 20 FPS, which is a little bit noticeable while playing. I'm not going to blame the Bravo 15 on this one though. Fortnite is pretty horribly optimized, and I always get pretty bad 0.1% results no matter what hardware I'm on. Definitely not blaming this on that one. In Call of Duty Warzone, I was playing at the system recommended settings as shown here on the screen. It was mostly normal settings with some low ones here and there, and at these settings, the Bravo 15 was just shy of hitting 100 FPS average. The 1% and 0.1% lows were good though, both were above 60 FPS, but it was just unfortunate that even at these low of settings, I couldn't maintain 120 FPS average to fully utilize the display. I tried lowering all the settings to the lowest, and that actually didn't make that much of a difference. Last but not least, we have a title that will bring almost any system to its knees, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I played at the medium preset and was actually averaging at least 60 FPS in most situations. 1% lows were in the high 40s and 0.1% lows were in the high 30s, so it was actually a really good playing experience. It's by no means making full use of the 120Hz display, but I don't think it really needs to, because single player open world games like this, they're perfectly enjoyable at 60 FPS. It's not competitive or anything like that. So there you have it, the MSI Bravo 15 featuring the Ryzen 7 4800H and RX 5500M. Since this is a $1,000 laptop and it has really appealing specs on paper, I think I can look past some of the things like the touchpad being a little bit odd just because most people are going to be using a mouse anyways. Or if I was browsing and stuff, the touchpad worked fine. It was just a little bit weird. And the panel's color accuracy, that can be circumvented again with like an external display. Or maybe you might not even want this for that. You might just be using it for school and gaming. So color accuracy might not even matter to you. Those things are pretty manageable and they aren't complete deal breakers in my opinion by themselves. There are plenty of laptops that like don't do too well in some of these categories and they can still be considered good. The thermals and fan noise, however, those things don't have a quick fix. Like MSI can definitely improve the Dragon Center software to make it so that you can actually have control over your fan curves, which will help a little bit. But as you saw in the benchmarks, the temps were getting really high anyways, and the fans will eventually need to ramp up to compensate regardless. Either that or the hardware is going to have to downclock, and it has to do one or the other. So I think there's a serious design flaw if it does have to make a choice between one of the two. It shouldn't have to do that. Again, I think this is partially due to the bottom cover choking off the fans, but I'm not sure what MSI can do about it at this point. I think honestly the only way that I could recommend this laptop is if you're a person that doesn't mind fan noise because you either always have headphones on or if you work in like a really loud environment already. But if that's not the case, then for $1,000, I think you're gonna have to look elsewhere. Maybe if the price was lowered or if it took like a permanent price cut or like if it had a really good sale, then this laptop can start looking appealing again. But at MSRP, I think there's just too many flaws to justify the price. But yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for this video though. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. I want to thank you as always for watching and supporting the channel. I really do look forward to reading your comments on this laptop as well as the video in general down in the comments below. And yeah, I'll see you down there as well as in the next video. Bye.